Hey, folks, welcome to Chapter 2 of the NASM 7th edition Personal Trainer Certification Textbook. And this is the personal training profession. So, of course, before we get started, please remember to actually study the chapter requires writing. You can read it, but make sure you're always rewriting the material. It's one of the best techniques, simple, basic techniques that I have learned over the years to actually memorize information, no matter what it is that you're actually studying. Of course, utilize any other paraphernalia you got, especially if you're a tactile learner. Again, I like to use this little squeezy ball that I kind of roll around while I'm taking notes. Simply helps to keep or distract me, so to speak, my sort of need for tactile stimulation. But again, as you're going through each of these chapters, make sure that you're taking notes. A couple of things also to keep in mind as you're going through the chapter. First thing is go to the back of the chapter first. I'm going to do that in a second with you. Make sure that whenever you're looking through the actual written material, whether it's here or if you're using the online textbook, to stop and look for the bulleted materials, and depending on which tables or figures you're looking at, you'll also want to memorize some of those, and that's what we'll go through. So first and foremost, in chapter 2, we're going to, again, always go to the back of the chapter first, because they have a chapter summary. They've got, and let me see, that's chapter 4. So chapter 2 is page 54. Chapter 2, page 54, chapter summary is just a single paragraph. Doesn't hurt to read it. The chapter review on page 55 is a little bit longer, but again, I am going to recommend that you do read through it. Do not take notes from your chapter review at the end of the chapter. All we're trying to, and remember, you're not reading the chapter. Please don't do that. Remember, if you want to read the chapter, that means you have 90 days, maybe 120 days to study. But there's always a balance. If you take too much time to study, you start to forget the material that you were originally studying from. So there's a balance here. You've got to make sure that you're not taking too much time, but obviously not taking, too little, or you're taking too little time. So kind of the balance here is anywhere between 60 days to 90, again, depending on how much time each day you're studying. But in general, I do recommend that you don't read like a novel, right? That's not what you're really needing to do when it comes to passing the exam. So you go to the back of chapter 2, read the summary, read the chapter review, put your pen down, read it through, kind of open up your brain, soften it up. I hate to say it that way, but soften up your brain a little bit to the actual materials. Then you get to your chapter highlights. Once you get to your chapter highlight, that is going to be your bulleted points. That's when you come over, you grab this, and you look at each of the bullet points, read the bullet point, but don't rewrite the bullet point because they're a sentence. Generally, it's a fairly long sentence. Some of them are shorter than others, but your goal with the bulleted points is to compress that information down, or sort of rewrite to sort of the bare minimum amount of information needed to capture the concept of the bullet point. Remember, when you're given bullet points in any of the chapter materials and the bullet point is one word, rewrite it. It's simple. But when your bullet points are condensed information that are still a sentence, 2 sentences long, well, they've compressed it down for you, and that's great. We appreciate that. However, it's still too long because you're trying to get the gist of the bullet point itself. So I'll give you an example. The first bullet point here: from working in a large health club to training clients in their own homes, fitness professionals have numerous options to establish a personal training practice with a consistent flow of clients. Now, the initial clause, from working in a large health club to training clients in their own homes, is unnecessary when I'm trying to remember the gist of this information. Pretty much there's only one real concept in here, and that's that fitness professionals have numerous options, many options, to establish a training practice. Okay. Now, I don't need with a consistent flow of clients, but I hope you get the idea. When you read this bullet point, it's a pretty long sentence with multiple clauses in there. Well, the clauses, some of these are just unnecessary to get the basic concept. For the most part, this bullet point is saying that fitness professionals have lots of options to work in the field or to establish their own training practice, period. And that's what you write down. And when you write that, you're going to figure out, well, that is just common sense. It's not like you're going to have to rewrite that one particular bullet point over and over to memorize it. So the study strategy is be smart about what it is you're spending time on. Don't read through this entire chapter. Don't read through any chapter. You need to memorize the side panel terminology. You need to read through the chapter highlights and look at the bullet points and compress them down to more manageable concepts or words that you can remember. Okay, I'll just do another one for you here at the bottom of the chapter highlights. So this is the third one up. Social media and other digital marketing campaigns are extremely important for growing a modern fitness business. How would you compress that down? You don't need that whole sentence. Social media, right, are important for growing your business. Social media is important for growing your business. Now, again, that is, I would hope, common sense. If it's not common sense, then write it down and it will help you to memorize it. So there's your initial start to chapter 2. Now let's kind of run through this because there are some areas here that are important, and there are some concepts from a study strategy perspective that you'll start in chapter 2 that'll help you throughout the rest of the chapters. You could, of course, look at the learning objectives, not necessary, but as I look at pages 28 and 29, page 29, there is a stretch your knowledge box. I will, at this point, recommend that you at least read it. Again, some students have told me that they did see some questions, depending on the chapter, where they thought that it had come from one of these stretch your knowledge boxes. So there's probably not going to be a lot of questions on the actual exam. The stretch your knowledge boxes are interesting pieces of information. So that would be the only reason I recommend you actually read through them, but not anything here on these 2 pages that you're going to spend any time with. You'll notice I'm not reading it. Please don't read it. It's not a novel. And there's nothing really in here that you're not going to find somewhere else that would be on the exam that you would need to know. So move on. Commercial health, don't worry about this. Here's where you're at, table 2.1. Now remember, anytime you see bullet points in the copy, in the text, or you see tables, stop for a second and remember, a table was given to you to compress and make certain amounts of information more sort of academically, I would say, accessible, right? So, and all I'm saying is they could have written all this into the copy, but they compressed it into a table. Now, I will say this, table 2.1, types of health clubs. Come on, look at the descriptions in here. You know, you're not memorizing this. Don't try to memorize that particular column. That's like 4 paragraphs of information. What my recommendation is, when you get to table 2.1, sure, you can go ahead and read the table, but please don't rewrite table 2.1. That is not necessary for sure. Now, what I would do is I would look at table 2.2, employment options for independent contractors, and I would then take a look at the employment options studio health club and read through the description. Here's the recommendation. If you did not know the description of a studio or health club, you may want to write that down. However, my experience with students taking and passing the course, they have told me they never saw anything from any of this information on page 31. I'm just saying that in this case, you might want to take a look at table 2.2, look at it and read it. If you're unsure of it, then you may want to write it down. You can see we're moving quickly through chapter 2. Well, here you go. You've got 1, 2, 3, terms that it's a good idea to look at, rewrite, and quote, memorize. There are 2 training tip boxes. Again, not a bad idea to read through these. I'm not going to tell you to study and memorize this information. For instance, on page 32, you've got some bullet points, but it's in the training tip box. Okay, so don't worry so much about these particular bullet points because they're in that training tip box. There's no bullet points in the main copy of the text. So once again, NASM is giving you some interesting information, could be helpful information. Whether or not you're actually going to see that on the exam, that's doubtful. So operational costs. And remember, just like I said with bullet points in general, anytime you see a definition, make sure that you compress that definition down to a word or 2 words, maybe 1 phrase that will summarize and make the memorization of it a little bit easier. Now you get page 34. Look, adjacent careers. Yes, I know these are bullet points. I don't think I've ever seen or heard anybody say anything about these being on the exam. Again, if they do ask you a question on page 35 on resume writing or something like this, it would be 1 question, maybe. So I'm moving past this, getting into some of the more pertinent data. Once again, page 36, 37. No, resume writing, I wouldn't be too concerned about that. Again, even if they asked you a question, I wouldn't spend a lot of time trying to memorize a lot of information where you maybe see one question on it. Move past that. Page 38, you've got 2, 38, 39, you've got some training tip boxes. Not bad to kind of look through that. Again, nothing to see here on page 38. You could, of course, read through the 2 bullet points for pre-interview and interview. Again, if you see a question, it's going to be maybe 1 question on this material, simply giving you the data that I have collected from students that have taken the exam as well. Again, page 40, 41, do know the definition of a prospect. Please don't read figure 2.2 and try and memorize that. Move right past it. You're going to go into page 42. It's not a bad idea at this point on page 42. A client could hire a certified personal trainer for many reasons, but the services that clients are actually paying for and expect include the following: accountability. That's what I would write down. Accountability, support, feedback and guidance, and results. Okay, you don't have to rewrite the actual copy that goes along with that particular definition. You can read it, but you want to memorize those four elements that go into what a client is actually paying for. Training tip here. Look, some of these training tips should be, I hope, common knowledge. Smile, say hello, and look people in the eyes. Please tell me that you don't have to write that down to memorize that. Isn't that how you? If you don't do that, if you don't already follow these basic rules of engagement and social interaction with people, then please go ahead and write them down. Okay, safety procedures. Move forward. Now, again, see what I'm doing. I'm going through chapter 2. I've already read and rewritten the bullet points at the end of the chapter. Now I'm moving through and I'm writing down these particular concepts and words because NASM thinks they're important enough. They put them in blue. You don't have to read through the entire copy of the material. Again, training tip on page 45. Forecasting. There's only one word that I'm looking for. You are going to be tempted to read all through this and then start taking notes. Please don't do that. If you're trying to get this done in a reasonable amount of time. Is it interesting information? Absolutely. The try this box. Well, this is the first time I've seen that one in chapter 2. Don't worry about that. That's great information, but not for passing the exam. Marketing, yes, okay, you got the marketing information. They will hit you with some more of that for sure. Unique selling proposition. These are things you need to memorize. So remember what I said, side panels, look at the terms on the side panel, SWOT analysis. You should know these things. Bulleted points on page 48, right? Specializing in working with active adults, ages 55s and old, examples, and they're just giving you examples. And then SWOT analysis, SWOT meaning SWOT, strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. That is, by the way, if you think about it, all they did for you right here on page 49 is they just summarized it for you in table 2.3. So there you go. There's your sample SWOT analysis. It's a great way to just kind of summarize all this. You got to know the 4 P's of marketing, page 50, 1, 2, 3, 4, communicating the benefits of the product, identify competitive price, service will be promoted, selecting the place. Those are the 4 P's of marketing. You should know those. Sample marketing plan, that's kind of simple. You could read through that. Social media. For the most part, these things will be outdated pretty much in a week. Industry events and networking. It's one of the reasons why they're not going to ask you a whole lot of questions on some of this, but they're giving you the information with the assumption that you would be using it to actually get into the personal training industry. Continuing education, you'll notice no definitions in the sidebars. As soon as I see that, I move on. Acquired skills, benefits, working with niche populations, increased pay, you're at the end of the chapter. Chapter 2 is not an unimportant chapter. It's just that you're not going to see a ton of questions from chapter 2. So just keep that in mind. Now, remember, as I said, you're now at the end. You would have already read the summary, read the review, and then worked on the chapter highlights. Now that is the end of chapter 2, and we'll see you in chapter 3.